back again. Here we have, I don't know if it's Ken, G.I. Joe, and here's Sharpay again. These are my props. I don't know if you brought in someone. But what I want to talk to you about, remember I said in the earlier segment that the two ways of being human are to be masculine or feminine. So let's first, Sharpay, will you hold on for a second? Sure, I will. Okay. The first one I want to talk about is this guy. Wouldn't you say that this guy is rough, tough, and buff? And I would say that because, look, there's his kind of scraggly goatee. He's pretty rough. Look, I'm sure he's not on steroids. He's just built big time like that. And, he is a man. And so think about your father. You can kind of scratch his beard if you wanted to. Your father is rough, tough, and buff. Some of you guys who are watching, soon, if not now, you will be much bigger and stronger. In fact, when I give my talks, I often ask a 7th or 8th grade boy to come and arm wrestle me, and they always beat me. In fact, I try to do this, like I'll take their arm and I'll be arm wrestling, and then I use both ends. They still are beating me, and then I use all my weight and they still beat me. So why is that? Because guys are built differently than girls. And Pope John Paul accentuates that. And I just made up rough, tough, and buff. I think it's funny. Well, I would say to you, as Pope John Paul says, there is a language of the body. Think about language. Like, there's a way of communicating. So the reason why God made all of you guys who are watching with bodies like that is to send you a message. And what's the message? You are to protect and provide. Your rough, tough, and buff bodies tell you to protect and provide. For whom? For me! Okay, shh. Okay, it's not your turn yet. Yes, for women and children especially. But for, all people who need help. But especially for women and children. Rough, tough, and buff. So think about protect and provide as the language of your body if you're a guy. And let's think about some examples that you junior high guys can really learn from. And if you're a girl, think about, kind of letting the guys serve you. In fact, I gave a retreat to 8th graders about 3 weeks ago. And the girls, they wrote this evaluation back to me, and they said, thank you for teaching these guys about rough, tough, and buff and protecting and providing, because now in the classroom they act differently. So, why? What happens? The guys start seeing, you guys can start seeing, that to live out the language of your body will make you sort of really cool in the eyes of the girls. And that's not the reason why you want to serve them, but it's a byproduct. So, for instance, opening the doors for them, letting them go first in line. If someone is making fun of a girl or insulting her, you could stand up and not let them do that. What about your little sister? Can you provide for her? Maybe she wants just to play a game. Maybe you have to play Pretty Pretty Princess with her or something like that. That's a way of providing for her that you guys might have to do. What else? What about your mom? Guys, you could protect and provide for your mom. For instance, if you see, let's say she works outside the home and she comes back and you could tell that she's had a hard day, you could provide for her by saying, Mom, why don't you sit down and I'm going to start help with the dinner. Things like that. I think if you start now, you're going to form yourself that when it's time for you to start dating and eventually get engaged and be married, then you will be ready. You'll be guys who know how to live life, and you will be good men. Now I have this story for you, and so far hopefully you think I've been quite funny. Well, the story I have to tell you is a really difficult one, so it's not funny at all. So I want to prepare you for that. This story has to do with one of my former students, Fernando. And I taught Fernando in, I think, 7th grade and 8th grade and 9th grade. And Fernando was a really good guy. I kept up with him even after he graduated from high school. And then I found out the story about him. It's a true story. Well, he and his sister Rosie, I had also taught Rosie, and she and he went to this kind of restaurant bar type of thing, like a Chili's or something. And Fernando happened to go to the bathroom. When he came back, these two guys are harassing Rosie. So he went up to them, knowing, and Fernando had a rough, tough, and buff body, and he said, "Hey, quit harassing my sister." And these two guys said, "Oh yeah, what are you going to do about it?" Well, So these guys said to him when he came back, "Well, what are you going to do about it?" Now I'm going to give you this hesitation here, because sometimes a man with his rough and tough and buff body, the best thing to do is just to get out of a situation and not use any sort of physical violence. However, you'll see from the rest of my story that Fernando did not have an alternative. So they stepped outside, and Fernando beat up both of them. Yes, he protected his sister Rosie and her dignity and the sacredness of who she was from these guys harassing her. Well, Fernando didn't know at the time that it was gang members that he beat up. And so the gang members here in Dallas found out where he lived, and they shot up his home. Fortunately, no one was there, but they found him a couple of days later on June 20th, and they shot Fernando to death. Fernando shed his flesh and blood for the sake of his sister Rosie and her dignity. And notice I'm using the words flesh and blood. Remember, we hear about flesh and blood with Jesus. Jesus shed his flesh and blood for all of us. He was the man of all men. He was so brave that he died on a cross, shedding his flesh and blood, and continues to protect us and to provide for us, his church, especially Eucharistically, when he gives us his very own flesh and blood to receive in Holy Communion so that we can be transformed. Gentlemen and you girls who are listening, you guys won't often probably be called to protect someone in that way. Instead, you will probably be called to protect in day-to-day activities. So for instance, if someone is sitting alone, guy or girl at a cafeteria, and you want to protect that person from being made fun of, maybe you'll go over there and you'll sit down next to him or her and work on your friendship with him or her. How is that protecting and providing? It's because you're brave when people might still make fun of you. What about when guys are telling bad jokes or something, or sharing stories that they shouldn't? You can protect the dignity of others in that way just by standing up. So it's this day-to-day stuff. Maybe your teacher needs you to help her. Those are the ways that you could shed your flesh and blood, guys. Maybe not as dramatic as Fernando, but nevertheless still as serious. Another thing that I'd like to tell you about has to do with the fact that 7th grade boys taught me once. I was teaching an all-boys class probably about 5 or 6 years ago. And I was teaching them about this rough, tough, and buff stuff and protecting and providing. And you know what they said to me? They said, "Ms. Ashour, think about this. When a girl or a woman is pregnant and a guy takes her to an abortion clinic and takes her in there," they taught me this, they said, that man is afraid of a baby this big. They are not going and not living according to the language of their body to protect and provide for women and children. So not only is the baby killed, not protected, but also the woman is hurt. The reason why I told you that story is because these 7th grade boys taught me that the guy who doesn't understand that he's supposed to protect and provide violates his rough and tough body, even with a baby this big.